that I would like to welcome all of you to the second webinar in our series. This is Your Farm and Your Guests, Insurance and Liability Considerations. I'm Scotty Jones, and I am the founder and executive director of the U.S. Farmstay Association, lovingly known as Farmstay USA. We launched in 2010, and you can see the two URLs that we use for our association. But I'm also the co-owner of Leaping Lamb Farm and Farmstay that we opened in 2006. So I am very involved with the Farmstay movement, and I also know as a Farmstay operator the things that worry me and the things that I love to do. And so I feel that I understand where we're all coming from in this business. This is my contact information here, but I'll also have it at the end. A little bit of housekeeping before we start. Zoom allows you to interact with us. So Kate is on chat right now, and you can type questions to her if you are having any tech questions or having problems with your audio or video. The Q&A, which you will see in the bar that pops up for you, is for questions that we are going to answer at the end of both of our presentations. So feel free to type in questions at any time. We will be muting all the microphones other than mine and Kelly's, just to keep this simple. So you will need to type in your questions. We will answer them verbally at the end. There is a link already to the AGRITOURISM safety kit that is available on the Farmstay USA website in the Farmer's Guide under insurance. And that is something I will be giving you an example of at the end of Kelly's presentation. This webinar will be posted on the Farmstay USA website in the Farmer's Guide in the same place, hopefully within about 24 hours of the presentation. And finally, what I don't have on here is that there should be a survey that pops up at the end of the entire webinar. And if you can answer those 4 or 5 questions for me, that would be great. We did find out from attendees last time that it was so fast they didn't really see it. So let me introduce our guest speaker today. Her name is Kelly Kapple. She's an insurance expert with Country Financial here in Oregon. I know her because I know her mother, who is in the agritourism business. And I know that Kelly was able to acquire agritourism insurance for her mother-in-law, when she was not able to get insurance anywhere else. So from a very young age, Kelly's been fascinated with agriculture, horses, and livestock. She has an extensive background in horsemanship. She owns 2 mares right now. But her passion for sustainability and homesteading, coupled with a business degree and insurance experience, makes her a great advocate for farms and ranches when it comes to navigating the world of insurance. So I would like to welcome Kelly Kapple to be our presenter for this webinar.
Thank you, thank you. Can everybody hear me okay?
I hope so.
All righty. Well, let's see here. All right. So I am honored here to meet with everybody and just tell you a little bit about navigating your farm insurance, and especially with the Farmstay movement. Like, what all does the insurance mean? What does it do? What does it not do? And who can help? So like Scotty said, after the presentation, there will be an opportunity to ask questions, and we will answer those for you. So without further ado, what to have on hand when you're meeting with your agent. I always like to see a copy of your current insurance declaration pages. So if you already have a farm and you have farm coverage, bring a copy of that. It makes the process a lot smoother. If you're just starting your farming venture and you just have home insurance currently, bring that copy, as well as your vehicle deck pages. If you have a liability umbrella, things like that, just because it makes the process go smoother. And then you'll want a list of your current operations and a vision of how you're going to grow in the next few years. This is really important because as an agent, I like to know upfront what it is that we're looking at, and then also what your plans are. The last thing that I want to see happen is that we get you coverage started and everyone's all excited, and then you tell me that you're going to do something that turns out we're not able to insure and we have to find coverage elsewhere. It's no fun for anybody. Next, be very clear about what you want to do on your farm to make sure it's going to be insurable. So kind of coming back to that same point, and I'm going to go over some things later on of what's covered and what's not, so you have a better idea of what we're talking about there. And you want to bring some good questions that you have, and do your research on the company that you're looking at for their farm background, because some companies will cover farms or say that they cover farms, but really it's kind of shell coverage, and it's not going to be covering like as rich of a policy as others can. So when I go to a farm, what I look for is number one, the cleanliness. So is there any rusty farm equipment sitting out in the field that is a trip hazard? You know, are things labeled and organized? It doesn't always have to be, but it's just a good idea of what we're looking at when I go to visit. We'll also look at the age and condition of the structures on the property. So if you have an old, 100-year-old dilapidated barn, that's not going to be insurable because the likelihood of it falling apart is very high. But if you've got, 30, 40, 50-year-old barn that's in good condition and you're using it, more than likely going to be able to cover that. I will also be looking for wood stoves and pellet stoves in outbuildings. So this is one for more properties that were built. They're more older structures that typically have these. So unless somebody is actually occupying pretty much full time the outbuilding, if there is a wood stove, we're not going to be able to insure that building without removing that wood stove from there. Then the next piece, I want to be able to understand your vision for the farm. And because a really important part to me as the agent is to build a long-term relationship with all of my clients. So leaving a farm legacy, as I'm sure many of you know, when you're a farmer, your assets are all tied up with
Kelly, you've just gone off and we can't hear you.
Oh, you can't hear me?
Now start again. We got you as far as farm legacy and then you went away.
Ah, okay. So yeah, so farm legacy is basically talking about like your vision for the farm, if you want to transfer that to children or have that be able to continue on. So I discuss a lot of life insurance with my farm clients to make sure that estate taxes can be paid if you're planning to transfer it on to kids, or that property can be paid off and equipment can be paid off if you're wanting the farm to continue on. And then lastly, what's most important to the farmers themselves. So I'm sure many of you have seen this sign. This is the AGRITOURISM sign, just saying that there's no liability for an injury to participants in agritourism activities. So I get the question a lot, if I have this sign, does that mean that I'm okay and I don't need liability coverage? Well, in short, the answer is no. So good lawyers can easily get around those signs, and typically it can deter people from suing you, but it doesn't mean that they won't. So if someone is, if you have a couple on your farm and God forbid something happens to one of them and they were to pass away or be severely injured, the spouse is probably going to sue you. So what can you do about that? Well, the first step would be to get with a reputable farm and agritourism insurance provider. So depending on the company that you have, it may mean switching providers if your current one does not cover the scope of your operation. So I know from my stance that Country Financial will customize farm insurance. Every farm's coverage is going to look different. So, your livestock farmer is not going to be the same as, your organic produce farmer, things like that. And you want to make sure that you're working with a company that is financially sound and an agent that is resourceful, because the agritourism industry really is up and coming, and a resourceful agent is usually able to find coverage for you, or if not, able to refer you elsewhere where you can get coverage. So the first piece would be your liability insurance. So liability, just generally speaking, protects you and your farm from trip and fall. That's most common. Animal collision, which means if your livestock get out of the fields and say get onto the roads and they hit somebody driving by and the person dies or is injured, animal collision coverage will protect the farm from any lawsuit that could come from that. Your liability will also cover wholesale sales, so to restaurants, grocery stores, places like that, as well as farmers markets. And it also contains guest medical coverage as well, which would constitute if you have someone on the property and they get hurt and need an ambulance ride, things like that. Your insurance company will pay for that as a portion of the liability. So is there a difference between farm and liability insurance? Great question. Your farm insurance, if it's done properly, needs to include liability. So really your farm coverage will cover the larger scope of things, but liability is a portion that's coupled in with that. So you have liability coverage. Now what? Well, you're not done. If you've got a home, outbuildings, farm stay location, animals, or implements, those all need to be covered as well. So that all of those would be covered under your farm policy. Now, if you're doing things like selling soaps or bath products, canned goods, or you have a wedding venue on the property, then we need to talk about a commercial policy. So basically thinking anything that's not directly farming should likely have that commercial policy with it, because our underwriters will look at what exposure there is. So, a farm policy is not designed to cover selling retail goods, basically like canned goods or soaps. That would be a much more of like a business model. So that's kind of the difference there. So let's talk about some standard insurance exclusions. So the most common would be earthquake, backup of sewer and drain, flood, intentional acts, and mold. So the ones with the asterisks are ones that you can buy back insurance for. Flood almost always goes through FEMA, and then earthquake and backup of sewer you should be able to obtain from your insurance provider. Unique exclusions, the one that we've all been waiting for. So I get a lot of questions about, well, I'm planning to do this, is this thing covered? And really you need to talk one-on-one with your provider to see if something that you're wanting to do is not insurable. Each company will differ slightly, but for the most part, all major insurance companies will exclude the same things. So for instance, non-traditional construction, like if you have straw bale or cob buildings on the property, we don't really have a way to cover those under most insurance providers. Another thing would be if you're like planning to do a campsite on your property and have people come for camping regularly, that would not be considered farm exposure. So a lot of these things can be covered through alternate companies for a higher premium. And we can talk about that later one-on-one if you have further questions about that. But raw milk is an idea of that, which is also a unique exclusion because there is so much more liability with selling raw milk to the public, with people getting sick and there being bacteria. As good as raw milk tastes, and I know because I love it, it's not something that most companies are going to be able to cover. So what if you want to do something that is considered excluded? Can you just not insure that part of your business and insure the rest? That is also a great question. And the answer is no. So your insurance company is going to want to cover the whole scope of the business and the farm to make sure that, because we're in a contract with you, so we are on the hook for covering losses that occur on the farm. And if there's something that you hide from the insurance company and then there's a claim associated with it, it puts a bad taste in everyone's mouth just because we may or may not be able to pay that out. And if it is payoutable, then you're likely going to have your coverage terminated because that was not spelled out in the agreement beforehand. So that's a huge question that I get asked often. And then secondly, is there such thing as being underinsured on your farm policy? Yes. This is also one reason why it's good to meet with your insurance agent for an annual review, especially when you're a farm starting out and you have some different ideas of things that you want to do, with your vision plan. We want to make sure that we're covering that scope of operation. And take, for instance, if you have a barn on your property that we're covering for $60,000 and it's a 30-year-old barn and you want to add more square footage to the barn and make it double story, and that has not been updated on your policy, and let's say that a fire comes through and burns it down, we want to make sure that we're covering that full amount for you. And if it has not been updated on your policy, the full amount of the barn will not be covered. So very important to have that annual review. All right, let's talk about the underwriter. So your agent is the one that you work with face-to-face, but the underwriter has the final say on the policy. And as an agent myself, it's my fiduciary responsibility to make sure that I am doing the best by my clients. And so you want to make sure that your agent hopefully has a good relationship with their underwriters in order to get that policy processed for you. So as a rule of thumb, for a standard farm policy, anything fun is not insurable by our farm underwriters. And that is because our farm underwriters want to make sure that they're protecting the company from any potential losses. So typically things that haven't had a precedent before, underwriters are hesitant to write coverage for. That doesn't mean that they won't, but it just means that at first glance, it might be a little bit difficult. And so with that being said, your agent will go to bats for you and work with the underwriter to either A, try to get an exception so that we can write the business, or B, be able to figure out a way to get that covered regardless. And it may be that your agent has to work with a couple different underwriters from different lines. So as opposed to farm, maybe they have to go through business or commercial to write a portion of the business. And so that's a little inside detail on the underwriter. All right, so what will the insurance on your farm cost? This really varies as well. So I recommend getting some customized quotes on this. It depends on the size and construction of the home, the number of buildings, the type and size of buildings, number of acreage, and then also your annual sales from the farm. Typically, in my experience, I've seen anywhere between, on the average small scale local farm doing a little farm stay, between 1,000 and 3,000 per year. But again, that number can vary depending on the company and depending on just the scale of your business. So how do you find an agent or a company that will insure you? Well, if you've got Country Financial in your state, which we are in 19 states, Oregon being the second largest one that we operate in, definitely check with us. Our roots were founded in 1925 on the principle of farmers helping farmers, and our motto really hasn't changed all that much. We really specialize in custom farm protection. However, if you don't have Country Financial in your state, check with a local broker and let them know exactly what it is that you want to insure, and they can help you piece that coverage together. And if you've got questions on where to go, if you don't really have an idea, give me a call or send me an email. I'd be more than happy to point you in the right direction. And here's my information should you want to contact me. Thank you so much.
So thank you, Kelly. And I am going to switch over from her back to here. And then I'm going to get to the next part of this talk. And this is just to wrap up and give you a little bit of a kit that might help you before you have that insurance agent come out to your farm. This is actually a safety kit that's been put together by the National Children's Center for Rural and Agricultural Health and Safety. But really, it's not just for children. So as Kelly was mentioning, there are things you can do to mitigate your risk and to make your insurer happier with your agritourism business. This is what the website looks like. And this is where you start. They have everything from what they call educate, which is a walkthrough, to identify, which are checklists, to address, which are then resources. And I have found this very helpful. The walkthroughs are kind of funny. Here, I'm going to give you an example. These are the kinds of things that they want you to look at on your farm. And we all become so used to our own farms that we don't see dangers, basically. And I always walk my guests around within 30 minutes of them being here, because I've found that if accidents are going to happen, they happen within the first 30 minutes. And I do call it the danger tour. But so you want to be looking at your fencing, and you want to be looking at walkways and emergency preparedness. And so you'll see all of these topics are addressed in their walkthroughs, and then they have activities. So we may not all do these activities, but if you have a corn maze or you have a hayride. And so here's an example of their barriers and fencing walkthrough, and it's kind of a test. So they give you this question first: should there be a fence between this child and the cows? And as long as you answer yes, you get a little green correct mark. Even if you answer no, you will still get this correction photograph, which will say, yes, there should be a fence. And then it'll say what the correction is, and then additional guidelines and recommendations. From a child's eye level, the operation has been checked to assess the need for barriers and fencing. So that's getting down on your hands and knees, maybe. And then to go along with this barriers and fencing, they actually have a checklist. And you can walk around your farm or your ranch with these questions, and maybe you might want to add some other ones to it. But are all the fences inspected regularly and repaired as needed? So can you check that off, or is that something that needs to happen? Are gates checked regularly to ensure they close and latch properly? So these would just be a few examples of what they have on that checklist. Here I took an activity that they have about should guests be getting on the wagon for the hayride. And of course they say no, they shouldn't be loading. And here they say the horses need to be hitched with the driver seated. Well, I was specifically looking at this picture thinking the wagon wasn't hitched to anything, and if you get enough people sitting on the end, it's going to flip up backwards. So there are numerous reasons why those people should not be on that wagon yet. And again, you'll see down here additional guidelines. Tractors should also be hitched to the wagon, etc. And then here is part of a checklist. I couldn't get the whole thing on my screen, but does the hayride route avoid steep grades or other hazards? And so again, just by going through this list, sometimes it points out things you haven't thought of or you haven't seen or that have just gotten past you. The other part of the website is that they do have signs, and I picked the most boring signs, sorry, but there are signs that you can print out and laminate that you can put around your farm, and it has everything to do with places where people shouldn't go, to hand washing stations, to animal interactions, and most of the rest of them are much more colorful than this. And then they have this section, lots of sections, with PDFs that you can use to either print out again and laminate. For instance, there's a communicating with guest checklist, or else I took this example, helpful hints for a safe visit. And so it's something like this, and you would just take this as a template and customize it for your farm. But I just feel that this is a really, really useful site for all of us to use and to refer back to. And specifically, you can print out all of those checklists and kind of keep them in a folder and review them once a year before your insurance agent comes out for that annual review. So I just wanted to make that available to people. The URL is on there, and this is my fencing between my sheep, and since sheep don't bite, I don't have any other kind of fencing there, but I thought I would just show you that. And then that is the end of what Kelly and I have to present, but we are more than happy to answer questions that have been asked, and I do believe that there are some. So we will do that as soon as I figure out how to get to there. Okay, so Kelly, I don't know if you know the answer to this question from Talia about agritism liability signs specific for Washington.
I was just looking into that a little bit, and it does appear that there are some available. If you just type in agritourism liability sign Washington into Google, it'll come up with some options there. So I would check there first.
And then I can add as well that there are 25 plus states who have passed these limited liability agritourism laws. For any of those states that you all might live in, you should be able to get access to those signs either through an agritourism association, maybe your tourism association, or maybe your agricultural department. So you want to look now. There are more and more states, and so we will all have our own signs though, because they're all going to refer to that specific law or bill in that state. And they will all have different requirements about the language and the size of the signs. And I just want to add that I have those signs for Oregon posted where people park and also at the entrances to my farm.
Perfect. And it looks like this next question here is from Lindy. Her question is, do you insure wineries too? I'm glad you asked that, Lindy. I can't speak for other companies, but Country Financial does have some very strong winery coverage as well. So like farms, ranches, wineries, those we're all very good at. And we have a special coverage on there as well for the wine. So if something happened to it while in transit or storage, let's say that it all, the bottles fell off the shelves and broke, or tipped over in an accident, we will pay the actual replacement cost for the retail value of the wine. So the amount that you would sell it for to a customer is how much we would give you to reimburse you for that loss. So talk to me afterwards if you're interested in looking at that more.
Okay. Okay, let's go to Lisa's question here, which basically asks about, would it make sense for farmers to work in larger regional areas across state boundaries to negotiate with insurance companies? Because there are several farms in Vermont that are trying to work with the Farm Bureau to get better coverage. Or is insurance so state specific it doesn't make sense to work across state lines? Kelly, I'm going to let you answer that first part, and then I'm going to answer the second. I have another thought.
All right. So would it make sense for farmers to work in a larger regional area across state boundaries? So that is an excellent question. I don't have a solid answer for that, but I think that it's always worth looking at and worth trying to negotiate a little bit, because I know here in Oregon, for instance, the farm coverage is pretty great. I know in some states it's not. So that's my little 2 cents on that piece.
Okay, and so my part of that, Lisa, is that we actually tried with Farmstay USA to get one insurance company that covered the whole U.S. to cover all of our farms, or write a policy that would be a farmstay policy. And because farms are so diverse, I could not find any one company that was willing basically to take the risk. And when I pointed out that they do cover dude ranches, well, dude ranches are mostly about riding horses. That tends to be the biggest piece of liability, and they are bigger and they pay a lot of money. So the insurance companies are more interested in covering something where they can get $25,000 to $30,000 or more a year from each ranch, whereas they didn't see that farms had that kind of ability to pay those premiums. So I absolutely agree with you that we all should try to figure out how to work together, and I will be very interested to hear if Vermont, with your farms and the Farm Bureau, is able to negotiate anything better or any reduced rates. But I've been trying for about 5 years. So if you guys can start it and make the model, and then the rest of us can try to copy it, all power to you. Okay, let's go to Kara's. So I don't know, Kelly, if you have thoughts on this. I did mention that I put multiple signs up for all points of entry. Kara's wanting to know, should they put multiple signs up on their ranch? And I would say not only points of entry, but where people park. And I know that the sign in Oregon is really large, so it really stands out, but people certainly notice it.
Yeah, it's always a good idea to cover your bases as much as possible, especially if you do have, fairly substantial acreage. You do want that sign posted around any place where people could be parking, or, going to like livestock. You'd want that up, around the cattle or whatever form of livestock that you have. So just like Scotty said, that's a really good idea.
I would also add, there is an equine law here in Oregon, and I know there are equine laws through most of the U.S. So because I have horses, even though I don't allow people to ride, I still have that equine sign up as well, at the edge of the paddocks where my horses hang out. So that would be, you don't have to just have one kind of sign. If you know that your state has limited liability laws in other areas, you might want to think about that as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then Kara also wants to know if there are insights on liability forms. I'll talk to this first, and then Kelly, if you've got an answer. I found some liability forms used by other farms originally, and then I put those together with my information and showed it to my lawyer. And then once my lawyer gave me the okay, I use those on my website, and I also use those on my reservations so that people see a release from liability. My lawyer would love for me to have everybody actually sign that. They click on a I agree on my website, and so I mostly use it like that. And I've posted examples of the liability form that I use on the Farmstay USA website. But Kelly, what do you have to say about those forms?
Yeah, I think you pretty much hit the nail on the head there. It's always important if you find a good one to run it by your lawyer, or just make sure that your lawyer sees it in general and approves, because there can be loopholes on some of them if you just pull one offline. So to make sure that you've got a sound form, definitely run it by your lawyer.
Okay. So then, Lisa, yes, let us know. I will have to say, agritourism, so Lisa's question was, maybe we'll have more success as agritourism grows. Gosh, I sure hope so, because one of the responses I've gotten from a number of the insurance agents I've spoken with is that there just isn't enough law on this yet in terms of accidents and things happening, enough case law. So nobody wants to take the risk. Kelly, do you have any more thoughts on that?
Yes, it's definitely something that is in the works, more so with companies that already are situated to, accept farms. And if you want to like not scare the agents and underwriters, call it vacation rental on the property. Because that's a more familiar term that the companies are used to, and it doesn't make them go, quite as much as like farm stay, because they're like, what is a farm stay? And so that's something that I am working with very diligently with our underwriters at Country Financial to, have a little bit of sway on, making it a less scary word, so that we're able to, accept more of those farm stays.
Well, that's good to know. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So Kara wants to know, she says she has an equine sign, but not the agritourism sign. So Kara lives here in Oregon, and those signs are available. Travel Oregon has them printed out. So does Mount Hood Territory has them printed out. They're for sale for different prices. You cannot yet get them in your feed store, which is where you can get the equine sign. And I'm not sure with other states where you get the signs from and whether there is a cost to them. So I don't, I can only answer for Oregon, but Kara, you can get in touch with me and I can get you to the right place. Okay, so Talia is looking for that liability form that I was talking about. They're going to be under the Farmer's Guide on Farmstay USA. You have to be logged in, and I can't remember. I think that it might be in the toolkit. I think that's where it is. And again, we can chat offline and I can try to find that for you specifically. I'm pretty sure it's in the toolkit as an addendum. Yes, in fact, I know that's where it is. Okay, so Lisa is asking, how helpful do you think agritourism limited liability statutes are? This is going to be a question for Kelly. Do you think they reduce insurance premiums and or discourage lawsuits? Asking for a state that doesn't have one yet. Okay.
So great question. Kind of like I mentioned in my PowerPoint, it's a good discourager for people to sue, because there is that sign there that's like, hey, you're walking onto the property, there is liability, potential here, but we are saying that, it's a release of liability essentially. However, we have had, people who have sued even still. And so because if you just have that sign, nobody's really like signing anything, and a good lawyer is able to get around that. So with that being said, I always think it's a good idea for people to have like at least $1 million of liability coverage on the farm, because that's going to protect the farm property itself. It's going to protect your assets and your income. And then, depending on the assets, income, and value of the farm, that number we may look at going up from there, just to cover all bases. Because the last thing that we would want to have happen is a lawsuit, and you lose everything from it.
And so how about, because if you're from a state or even in a state that has a sign, if you have people who come on your property sign off on a release from liability form, is that any better?
If someone signs the form?
Yes.
It is a little better because it holds them somewhat accountable, and you can say, look, you signed this form if it does escalate to court. But yeah, it's always, a good idea to still have coverage in place because of that risk involved there. But having a signed form does kind of mitigate the risk a little bit.
Sure. And also understanding that these limited liability signs, if it's gross negligence, they don't cover you. So if you drive over a child with your tractor,
right,
that's not going to be covered by that sign. So just to make sure we're clear on what that sign means.
Yes.
Okay, so this question is for Kelly. What are your thoughts on insuring a lodge campsite with farming as the incidental income? Incidental income.
That is a very creative question. And I know we've done a little work on this. So I haven't seen that yet. It doesn't mean that it's not possible to do. I know with Country Financial, we have some brokers that if we are not able to do something such as, lodging, like if you have a farm stay and your primary source of income is not from the farm, but rather from the lodging, we are able to go through a broker of ours that you will still be working with me on it, but it's outsourced essentially. So kind of in regards to that question, that would be something that we could potentially pitch to our broker to see, put feelers out there and see if there is an option in a market for that. Because I bet you more than anything that is something that we could look at through the broker.
Okay, so we're done with that question. I have a question for Kelly because this came up with one of our farms in California. Is it a bad idea, if you lose your insurance or you're looking around for new insurance, is it a bad idea to do it on your own? Can you get blacklisted by insurers in terms of going around and talking too much? Does it make everybody nervous?
So great question. If you're talking to some insurers that all are, part of the same circles, and they either refer people to each other or they're in the same networking groups, that can happen. I have yet to run across that myself, but I know, California is a little bit different than up here in Oregon. So it would be a good idea to ask like an anonymous question on that, as opposed to saying, this is my farm's name and this is my name, and what kind of coverage can you provide for me here? I would start off by asking a more anonymous question and to get the ball rolling before then giving the name of your farm.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And then I see something here in the chat, which I'm confused about. Kelly, did you ask this question that has to do with if you have a farm where you're not allowing people on it, and then you also have an agritourism operation on an adjacent property, do you need to cover your farm in case people walk over onto it.
So if you have like two neighboring properties,
Yeah,
one is
with signage. Do you need signage on both properties, just in case?
I would cover all my bases with that.
Okay. Okay.
Mhm.
So are there any other questions? Oh, let's see. So our liability insurance covers both owned and leased.
Mhm.
I'm not sure if that's a question or a comment. Our liability insurance covers both owned and leased. But that would be a good question.
Yeah. So if you do have, a property that you own and then you have one or two or three that you lease, those should all be covered under the same liability. So yes, that would be an accurate statement.
Okay. Okay. So are there any other questions? Okay. So Talia just wrote, she said, my attorney told me in Washington State, if you don't charge for a service, then you can't be held liable. For instance, if you offer a workshop, but it's on a donation basis. Kelly, that's for you.
I have heard of that before as well. Like, I have a farm client that has the occasional like concert on their property, and they were wondering if we charge for it, it doesn't make a difference if we charge for it based versus donation based. And yes, it does. If you're doing it by donation, you're not really on the hook for it because your general liability will automatically cover it because they're guests on your property that just happen to be there for a concert, and you're like, if you want, you can donate money. But if it's an organized event where you're taking a payment for it, then you need to have insurance on that to cover it. Great question.
Okay. Okay. Well, and then she's also asking, how do insurance companies feel about this? But I think you basically answered that it'll be covered. I suppose if you do it a lot of times and there's big issues, then you might not feel very good about
it. Yeah, then we would talk.
Okay, and she said she covered it. Okay, so cool. Well, I think we're good. If you all have any other questions, please feel free to get in touch with either Kelly or myself or your own insurance agents if this has brought up issues for you. And I want to thank you, though, for attending this meeting. These are our future webinar dates and topics. The next one's going to be the farmer host, hospitality. I'm hoping to have one or two of our farmers speak about this, and then we'll be going through with those additional dates. So please look for our email reminding you that we will be hosting these webinars, and we look forward to having you attend. And if you have any good suggestions for other webinars you'd like to hear, I think I'm going to keep going with these. So please send those in as well. And basically, thank you very much, and have a good weekend. And fill out the survey. Okay, thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks. So,